Dr. Calla Reeves sat back in her cluttered office, flicking through a medical journal that was more about new galactic diseases than anything remotely interesting. The buzz of the intergalactic communicator caught her attention, breaking the monotony. A hologram flared to life, the sharp features of an alien assistant appearing before her. "Dr. Reeves," the assistant said with stiff formality, "you are hereby invited to the Zrithian Empire to attend a galactic feast in honor of your medical triumph in saving the Zrithian matriarch." Calla raised an eyebrow. "Wait, what?" She squinted at the assistant's hologram, then glanced around the office, half expecting to see a camera crew filming her reaction. "A feast? For what?" "My incredible ability to stop an alien queen from sneezing herself to death." "Not exactly, but your intervention has been deemed of great significance. The Zrithian king himself requests your presence." Calla sighed. "Oh great. Just what I needed, more alien royalty breathing down my neck because I happened to perform a miracle by accident." The assistant bowed slightly, completely unfazed by her sarcasm. "The feast will commence in 3 days. Formal attire is expected. Your transport will arrive shortly." "Formal attire?" Calla scoffed. "Listen, pal, I'm a doctor, not a diplomat. If they're expecting me to wear something that makes me look like a walking decoration, I'm out." The assistant, entirely without humor, nodded seriously. "The Zrithians have no such expectations of you, Doctor. You will be treated with the utmost respect." "Respect?" Calla muttered under her breath. "If I wanted respect, I would have stayed on Earth. But here I am, about to be some galactic circus freak at a fancy dinner. Great." She flicked the communicator off, still baffled by what just transpired. She glanced at the calendar. 3 days. A part of her wanted to ignore the summons, but the other part couldn't help but think about the endless amounts of wine and food that would undoubtedly be on offer. At least, she could eat something nice before getting back to her real job. The Zrithian transport ship, a colossal metallic beast, landed in the heart of their empire's capital. Calla had never seen anything like it. The ship's design looked like it was built by someone who had no idea how shapes worked. Smooth, twisted surfaces, golden accents, and an odd blend of sharp angles and curves that shouldn't work together but somehow did. It was all very alien. She walked off the platform and was immediately swarmed by attendants. They were all in perfect synchronization, murmuring greetings in a language she didn't understand. One of them handed her a long robe that looked like it belonged on a religious leader, or a character from a bad sci-fi show. She gave them a flat look. "You do realize that I don't wear ceremonial robes, right?" she asked dryly. The attendants exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond. One of them stepped forward, handing her a gold-rimmed belt. "This is the standard attire for guests of honor," he said in a tone that suggested this was non-negotiable. Calla rolled her eyes but took the robe. Whatever, it's probably better than wearing scrubs. The large halls of the Zrithian palace were opulent in a way that made her feel underdressed, even in the robe. Tapestries hung from every wall, showing off epic battles that looked like they belonged in a history book no one would ever read. The smell of unfamiliar food wafted through the air, making her stomach growl. A quick glance at the attendants revealed they had no sense of humor about it. Dr. Reeves, one of the Zrithian dignitaries, some fancy title she hadn't bothered to learn, greeted her with the kind of overzealous politeness only seen in movies about royalty. "We are most honored to have you here. Please, allow us to escort you to the feast." Yeah, Calla said, waving a hand. "Lead the way. I'm guessing the food's going to be the only thing worth my time." As they entered the dining hall, Calla was hit by a full-on assault of alien cuisine. Giant platters of brightly colored fruits, steaming dishes with vague shapes, and what looked like molten lava in decorative bowls sat before her. The Zrithian king, a massive figure with elaborate markings on his face, rose from his throne and greeted her warmly. "Dr. Reeves," the king boomed. "Your life-saving actions have forever changed the course of Zrithian history. We are forever in your debt." Calla gave him a wry smile, glancing at the table, where a dish that looked suspiciously like a 3-headed chicken sat. "Yeah, well, I just did what any half-competent medic would do. Not that big of a deal, really." The king seemed slightly taken aback, but before he could respond, a nearby ambassador piped up, "The human way is so humble. We Zrithians could never be as modest in our greatness." Kala turned to the ambassador and deadpanned, "Well, maybe it's because you guys don't have to deal with people dying in every waiting room on Earth. You get used to it eventually." The ambassador blinked at her. "So, you do consider saving lives a common thing?" "Well, saving a life is the bare minimum," Kala replied, raising an eyebrow. "In my field, we're more interested in keeping people alive long enough to argue with their relatives. It's all about quality of life, you know." The king looked confused, but the ambassador seemed oddly pleased by the comment. "A fascinating perspective, Dr. Reeves. We shall have to study it." Just then, a large alien dish was presented before Kala. It was a mass of gelatinous pink goo. The Zrithian king gestured grandly. "This is our finest delicacy, the zlo fruit. It is said to symbolize our people's power and resilience." Kala didn't miss a beat. "Oh great, a squishy fruit. Looks like the kind of thing you could survive on for centuries, but might regret it the next morning." The alien dignitaries around the table exchanged awkward glances. One of them, a small insect-like creature, laughed nervously. "Perhaps humans do have a unique sense of humor." "Well, that's one way of putting it," Kala said, picking up her fork and digging into the squishy fruit. She was determined to at least give it a shot. She didn't want to be rude, but at the same time, there was no way in hell she was going to act like this was anything close to fine dining. After a few seconds of chewing, Kala made a face. "Okay, I take it back. This is a horrible idea." The king looked alarmed, but the insect creature beside him leaned forward. "You do not like the zlo fruit?" "I didn't say I didn't like it," Kala said, grinning. "It's just, I wasn't prepared for something that looks like a fruit salad after a bad night out." She poked at the dish again. "It's like the taste of regret and bad decisions. A real treat." The room fell into an awkward silence as the Zrithians processed the implications of her statement, their wide, unblinking eyes betraying nothing. Kala realized she may have crossed some sort of cultural line she didn't understand. To break the silence, she leaned forward. "Hey, how about I just go grab a burger back at my hotel after this, huh? The kind with actual meat in it." The king cleared his throat. Perhaps there is much more to your species than we understood." Kala couldn't help but smirk, feeling both awkward and slightly triumphant. "If you think this is strange, wait until you see what happens when I'm really in my element." The feast was in full swing, and Kala couldn't help but feel like the entire situation was rapidly spiraling into a chaotic mess. The Zrithians were looking at her like she was some sort of alien celebrity, treating every sarcastic comment she made like a brilliant revelation. Meanwhile, she was just trying not to choke on the bizarre food she had no business eating. She'd already given up on figuring out what any of it was. The three-headed chicken, the squishy zlo fruit, and what could only be described as tentacle soup, were just some of the delicacies she had been presented with. A Zrithian ambassador leaned in, grinning far too widely, his multiple eyes blinking in rapid succession. "Dr. Reeves, your human simplicity is quite refreshing." She raised an eyebrow, trying to avoid the massive plate of glistening alien meat that was now being passed around. "Refreshing? I don't know. The last time I was told I was refreshing, I was the one who had to be revived after passing out at a bar." The ambassador blinked again, clearly confused. "You passed out at a bar?" Kala gave him a tired look. "Yeah, it's this human thing we do. You should try it sometime. Get a bunch of your alien pals together, drink a little too much of your weird, glowing booze, and see if you can still function afterward." The ambassador's confusion only deepened, but before he could respond, a Zrithian woman, obviously some high-ranking official, interrupted, her voice dripping with faux politeness. "Dr. Reeves, it is said that humans are unusually skilled in surviving things that would destroy other species. What is your secret? How do you remain so resilient?" Kala took a slow sip from her glass, watching the alien woman carefully. "Well, you know, it's a lot of good old-fashioned stubbornness and being too stupid to die." She glanced around the table, noting the confused looks. "Also, caffeine. Lots of caffeine. The alien woman didn't know how to process that, but she nodded thoughtfully anyway, probably assuming it was some ancient human wisdom. Ah, caffeine, how fascinating. She made a mental note to Google it later. By now, Kala had come to the conclusion that the aliens at the table weren't really trying to understand her. They were just trying to use her like some sort of diplomatic tool, in awe of her status without actually having the first clue about what she did to earn it. All they knew was she had saved their queen, and now they wanted to turn her into a spectacle. Kala wasn't in the mood for spectacles. She was in the mood for a quick exit, a hot shower and a burger. But that wasn't going to happen. Not unless she made it happen herself. The king, who had been watching her intently, leaned forward. Dr. Reeves, your humor. It is quite unlike any we have encountered. Is this part of your species, charm? Kala smirked. Well, that depends on who you ask. I mean, my exes would probably say it's more of a survival mechanism, but yeah, charm works too. She knew she was starting to sound more like the kind of person who was trying to be offensive, but honestly, it was getting harder to keep the sarcasm in check. At that moment, the waiter arrived with yet another dish, a giant, translucent shell filled with a pulsating jelly-like substance. Kala stared at it for a long moment before glancing up at the king. Really? She said, her voice tinged with disbelief. You guys seriously eat this stuff? The king's expression remained unchanged. It is a delicacy from our sacred moon. It signifies our connection to the stars. Yeah, it looks like it's trying to connect to my stomach and run away. She poked it with her fork. Does it have a name, or should I just call it, the thing that's going to haunt my dreams? One of the nearby Zrithians, who had clearly been sipping on something a little too strong, laughed loudly, sloshing his drink across the table. He pointed at Kala and shouted, "This human is hilarious. She speaks like the gods." Kala blinked, caught off guard by the comment. The gods, huh? Guess I better get used to being worshipped. She raised her glass dramatically and mock-toasted the table. To human humor, universally misunderstood. The king, not realizing she was joking, stood to his full height and lifted his glass, causing the entire room to follow suit in an awkwardly synchronized gesture. To human humor, indeed. May it bring great joy to our empire. Kala nearly choked on her drink. She had no idea how she'd gone from being a medic who just happened to save the queen to being celebrated as some kind of cosmic comedian. She glanced around at the table full of aliens watching her like she was some sort of divine oracle. They were all hanging on her every word. She took a deep breath. Okay. If I'm really going to do this, I guess I might as well go full divine comedian. Kala stood up, grabbing the nearest piece of Zrithian food, a hideous-looking purple blob, and raised it to her mouth. The entire table fell silent. Behold, the food of the gods. It's so sacred that it practically quivers in fear as I prepare to consume it. She shoved it into her mouth dramatically, chewing with exaggerated force. As she chewed, the jelly-like texture oozed across her tongue, and she immediately regretted her decision. The entire table waited in suspense, and Kala could feel the weight of 1,000 alien eyes on her. Well, she said slowly, swallowing with great difficulty, that was a mistake. I think this thing just tried to emotionally damage me. She paused. But hey, I guess this is what happens when you skip the survival guide for intergalactic feasts. There was a beat of silence, and then the table erupted in laughter. The Zrithians were practically rolling in their seats, their laughter echoing through the hall. Kala couldn't help but smile. It wasn't exactly the reaction she'd expected, but it was one she could live with. She sat back down, feeling a little more relaxed. If these guys could laugh at her attempted suicide by food, she might just survive the evening after all. A new round of drinks was passed, and Kala found herself in a bizarrely surreal moment. A human medic, who had done nothing more than stitch up an alien queen, now sitting at the center of a galactic political feast, surrounded by bizarre foods, political intrigue, and a whole lot of confused aliens. She didn't know how she'd ended up here, but one thing was for sure, this was definitely going to make one hell of a story back on Earth. More wine, Dr. Reeves? The king asked, pouring the glowing red liquid into her glass. Sure, she said, leaning back in her chair, but make it extra strong. If I'm going to keep saving your species' dignity, I might as well be a little drunk while I'm at it." The king's face twisted with confusion. "Your species drinks, for dignity?" Kala grinned, her lips curling into a playful smirk. "Absolutely. Haven't you heard? Alcohol is basically humanity's superpower." Kala sat back in her seat, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. The Zrithians had essentially turned her into the center of their social event, a spectacle in their grand dining hall. Every time she made a sarcastic comment or a joke, the room exploded in laughter. It was the kind of attention she'd never wanted, but here she was, drowning in it. The alien food was a bizarre challenge that she'd never get used to, and the diplomatic chit-chat was more exhausting than being on call for 24 hours straight. As she attempted to sip more of the glowing wine, something the Zrithians had described as nectar of the stars, she found herself thinking about what this whole thing was really about. Sure, she had saved the queen, but what did that actually mean in this context? She had done it out of medical necessity, not some grand plan to make peace with an alien empire. Her actions weren't the result of political maneuvering or some intergalactic hero complex. She was just a doctor doing her job. But in this room full of powerful alien beings, that didn't seem to matter. What mattered was that she had somehow, by sheer accident, become a symbol of hope and survival. A hero without even trying. Kala sighed, swirling the drink in her glass. It was a strange position to be in, especially considering that she had absolutely no idea what was going on or what they wanted from her. Her musings were interrupted when the Zrithian king turned toward her, looking at her with an intensity that could almost be described as admiration. He leaned forward, a massive golden chalice in his hand, his voice booming in the room as he spoke. "Dr. Reeves," the king said, his voice heavy with gravity, "I must confess. Your presence here has been most enlightening. Your wit, your courage, and your ability to cut through the complexities of diplomacy with such ease. These are qualities our people have long sought but could never attain." Kala couldn't help but laugh at that. "If by ease, you mean sarcasm and passive aggression, then yeah, I'm a master. Glad I could be of help." The king didn't seem to catch her tone. He nodded solemnly, as if her remark was an insightful commentary on the human spirit. "Indeed," he said, pausing dramatically. "And now, I ask that you help us with something far greater than a mere feast. Our people face a crisis. A disease, a plague of sorts, that threatens the very fabric of our society. We've been told humans have a remarkable understanding of diseases. Would you lend your expertise to us?" Kala nearly choked on her wine. "Wait, what? You called me here for a plague?" The king's eyes glinted with a mix of desperation and reverence. "Yes, Dr. Reeves. Your reputation precedes you. Our best healers have tried and failed. We need you." Kala blinked. She had seen her share of strange things in her career, but being asked to solve an alien plague at a galactic feast while still trying to figure out how to make small talk with a bunch of overserious aliens was a new one. She put her glass down with a sigh, running her fingers through her hair. "Okay, listen," she began, trying to get a grip on the situation. "I didn't sign up for any kind of plague control gig. I'm here because I saved your queen's life. That's it. No one mentioned anything about alien pandemics when I was invited here." The king's expression hardened slightly, though he was still calm. "This is the matter of the Zrithian Empire's survival, Dr. Reeves. We are an empire of great power, but this disease is spreading faster than we can contain it. It affects our warriors, our leaders, our families. We need your skills to save us." She stared at him, still processing. The Zrithians, with their extravagant dining hall and bizarre customs, were now asking her for something big. It wasn't as if she could just turn her back on them. As much as she wanted to go back home, a part of her couldn't ignore the seriousness in the king's tone. He wasn't asking for a cure for a small illness. This was life or death for an entire species. Kala leaned forward, setting her glass down more firmly than she intended. All right, she said, reluctantly agreeing. "But I'm going to need more information. And a lot more than just some fancy dinner and weird food. What exactly are we dealing with here?" The king nodded, signaling one of his advisors to step forward. The advisor, a tall, skeletal figure with a voice that sent a shiver down Kala's spine, handed her a datapad. She glanced at the screen. The images were unsettling. Swollen bodies, darkened skin, eyes glazed over in a permanent state of feverish delirium. This disease spreads rapidly through the bloodstream, targeting vital organs, the advisor explained. It mutates faster than we can track it. It is unlike anything we've encountered before. We believe it originated from outside our system. Of course it did, Kala muttered, reading further. Great, an intergalactic infection. That's just what I needed today. She rubbed her forehead. This wasn't going to be easy. How long do we have? She asked, trying to get a grip on the timeline. The advisor's eyes narrowed. We estimate only a few weeks before it becomes uncontrollable. Our best healers are unable to synthesize any treatments. We need your expertise. Kala leaned back, her mind racing through possibilities. She wasn't a virologist, but she had seen enough to know when something was beyond her. But this wasn't just about knowledge. It was about using the right resources, the right team, the right approach. The Zrithians didn't have the tech they needed to fight it, but she might be able to help if they gave her access to their medical labs. All right, she said, tapping the datapad thoughtfully. First things first, I need to see your medical facilities. I need to know what resources you have, and I need full access to your data on this virus. The more information I have, the better. The king nodded immediately. Of course. We will provide you with everything you need. Your efforts are crucial to the future of our people. Yeah, I get it. Kala stood up, adjusting the ridiculously over-the-top robe they'd forced her into. But just so we're clear, I'm doing this because your people are on the brink of extinction. Not because you threw a feast and think I'm some kind of hero. Got it? The king's face softened, a faint, appreciative smile flickering across his features. Understood, Dr. Reeves. We are grateful. Kala turned to the advisor. Get me to those labs, and no more of that nectar of the stars. I've had enough weird drinks to last a lifetime. As the advisor led her away from the feast hall, Kala's mind shifted into problem-solving mode. She didn't know if she could save the Zrithians. Hell, she didn't even know if they could be saved. But for the first time since she had arrived, she felt like she had control over something. For all their alien grandeur and pomp, they were just people, and she was a medic. It was the only thing she was really good at. And if she had to drink her way through another awkward dinner to get there, well, that was just the price of saving the galaxy's most dysfunctional empire. She sighed, trying to suppress the urge to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The lab was a pristine, cold environment, far from the lavish feast and high society of the Zrithian court. The sterile walls reflected the same sense of urgency that Kala felt as she walked down the halls. The further she walked, the more her medical mind clicked into place. This was what she was trained for. This was what she could handle. This was where she could make a difference. The Zrithian advisor, still trailing behind her, seemed almost too eager to show her every single piece of equipment, every scan, every monitor, as though trying to impress her with their technological sophistication. Kala wasn't impressed. She was here to find answers, not be dazzled by glowing consoles and fancy alien gadgets. The real question was, could their technology even measure up to what was needed to combat a rapidly mutating virus? And what did they really know about it in the first place? They arrived at a large open lab where several Zrithian scientists were busy analyzing data. Kala could already tell they were overwhelmed. Their frantic glances at the screens, their hushed conversations, the way they stumbled over each other to try and be helpful. It wasn't confidence, it was panic dressed up in lab coats. Dr. Reeves, we are prepared to assist you in any way, the advisor said, his voice barely concealing his desperation. Please, take whatever you need. Kala nodded but didn't speak immediately. She started scanning the room, noting the technology, the medical samples on the counters, and the overall lack of structure. It wasn't that they didn't have resources, it was that they didn't know how to use them effectively. They were throwing everything they had at the problem, but without direction, it was just a mess of data and half-formed ideas. She picked up a sample tube containing what looked like a blood sample, but the color of the liquid inside was off, dark, almost black. Not a good sign. Where are the blood samples from the infected? Kala asked, her tone now more businesslike. They are on that table, the advisor said, pointing to a far corner. We've isolated a few strains, but none of our treatments have worked. She walked over, examining the samples closely, her mind already jumping through a dozen protocols she'd learned over the years. They had the data, but it wasn't organized. They had samples, but they hadn't been properly catalogued. There were no baseline tests, no tracking of mutation rates, no comparison to anything she could recognize. It was as though the Zrithians had never heard of basic medical procedure. Have you tried isolating the genetic material from a human strain? She asked, turning back to the advisor. The advisor looked at her blankly. A human strain? We have not. Is that relevant? Kala sighed, rubbing her temples. Yes. If this disease is as complex as you say, and it came from outside your system, there's a good chance it mutated from something else, probably something viral. If we track the mutations in comparison to human viral samples, we might get some clue about its origin or how it's adapting. The advisor stared at her, clearly not following, but trying to seem knowledgeable. I see. That makes sense. We will acquire human samples immediately. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes. They were way behind. While they were scrambling to understand basic principles of infection, she had already mapped out a strategy in her head. But they didn't need to know that yet. They needed to focus on the basics. First things first, she said, turning back to the group of scientists. I need all the infected samples you've collected. I need full access to your research, and I need your best lab technician to assist me. This is about precision, not quantity. The scientists nodded, and one of them scrambled to bring over a detailed collection of the samples. Kala took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. It wasn't just that the Zrithians were behind, it was that they didn't seem to have any system in place for tackling this. They were reacting, not planning. She looked around the lab again, then at the advisor. You guys haven't even run basic viral cultures on this. You need a control group, baseline data. Where's your comparison for healthy blood samples? The advisor's expression was a mixture of confusion and frustration. We did not think to compare. No kidding, Kala muttered under her breath. All right, we're starting from scratch then. I need to know everything about the timeline of the disease. When did it first appear? How fast is it spreading? The advisor stumbled over his words as he tried to recall the details. It started in the northern sector. 6 weeks ago. The first cases were. 6 weeks. Kala interrupted, eyes widening. Why haven't you done more by now? This disease is already mutating at a ridiculous rate. You need a broader approach, not just these small, isolated efforts. I assure you, Dr. Reeves, we've tried everything we can, the advisor insisted, his voice becoming defensive. But you're asking questions we've never had to consider before. Our people are not accustomed to such rapid infection. She didn't respond immediately, taking a moment to look at the various readouts on the screens. Then she turned back to him, her expression grim. You guys have to understand. This isn't about just surviving anymore. It's about stopping this thing from becoming a permanent part of your ecosystem. If you let it spread unchecked, you're looking at a potential extinction-level event. Do you understand that? The advisor nodded quickly, his face now pale. We understand. Please help us, Dr. Reeves. Kala took a deep breath, trying to push down the frustration that threatened to spill over. All right, we'll start with the human genetic strain comparison. But first, I need you to give me access to your interstellar communication network. We need to start reaching out to other species for information. Maybe someone else has dealt with a virus like this. The advisor hesitated but then nodded. I will arrange for it immediately. Good, she said, already starting to feel the weight of the task ahead. It was clear this wasn't just about saving a single species. It was about preventing a galactic crisis. But that was the job, wasn't it? The thing she was trained for. She wasn't here to entertain a bunch of alien dignitaries at a fancy dinner. She was here to do her job, and nothing was going to stop her from doing it right. As the advisor left to make the necessary arrangements, Calla stood still for a moment, allowing herself a rare moment of calm in the chaos. She wasn't just some medic who had stumbled into a political feast. She wasn't just a joke. She was a professional, and she had a damn good chance of saving these people. She wasn't about to let them down.